Okay, we're going to look into ancient Amerindians, the Americans before the Europeans and people came to the Americas and founded what we know of as America today. I want to interject here at the start that we have found now up here coming into Alaska primordial Caucasians coming in, which predate the Amerindian Asiatic influx that came in. And I believe a new paper is just out where they've done the genetics on Kennewick Man and show him to be somewhat of a hybrid. And of course, whenever they first did the skeletal recreation of him, that set a lot of people off. It looks like Captain Picard. And another revealing video will be coming about that. My dad was extremely into Wild West and Indians and the whole idea and growing up and Roy Rogers and the whole thing, of course. And he got to be in the service and stuff, but he always harkened back to that idea. In fact, whenever he was going to be a flyboy in the Air Force, he got stationed in the choice of a couple of places, and he went to Hondo down here in Texas for a reason. In doing so, he's able to, be more in that area, check out the Alamo, all the things that went along with it. And I remember him telling us the story before we actually moved to Texas as children. And then, of course, within a year or two, we went down and saw the Alamo and ran around through and did things. And quite often we went on trips that involved somehow, in one shape or another, checking out some ancient Indian place. We went up through the Southwest and so on. We went through to Dodge City, Kansas, and all the things, and got to see OK Corral and all the different places. And also Indian reservations. We got to see ceremonies, all types of things. We went to Mount Rushmore and got to see the ceremonies that were up there. It was pretty neat. One of the earliest memories I have of things like this was when my dad was stationed in Omaha, Nebraska, which had been up here in the edge of Sioux territory, Omaha, and the Nebraska Indians, and Platts Bluff area, and that there was a town that was right on the border over here to the east, and its name was Exarban. And they said it was an Indian town and that it was all set up for things. And I remember us going there, and there were giant rodeos and things that went on there that were natural, just rodeos and things like that went on there too. But then there was a lot of neat shows that went on. And I don't know if y'all remember the show of Daniel Boone that used to be with Fess Parker on TV and stuff, but I actually got to meet him, and damn, I wanted a coonskin cap, but they were something like $15 back then, and my dad wasn't going to spend it. But I did end up getting a couple of other trinkets and a little purse pouch that had beads all over it and things that you could keep money in or whatever. My sister got this. I think that was when she got her moccasins, because she didn't get them up at the other place. Keith got something else. I believe it may have been even a peace pipe with feathers on it and things too at this time. And somehow in all of this, there was one of those fake little cheap kid brass trumpets that came into the situation. I remember it being a noisemaker, and surely that didn't have much to do with anything, but I think that also was like the bugle. That okay, so regardless of that though, Exarban though, and I grew up wondering about that, and I had that name, and I always told, that it sounded like it was backwards. And I remember one day figuring out that that's Nebraska backwards. And I told my mom, she goes, "Yeah, I told you all that." Well, we didn't remember. I was 4, 5, 6 years old, and that fact. And every time we go back to it, my mom would always, spit that out there from then on. She'd go, "Nebraska, that's Nebraska backwards." But in that too, there was a rodeo that we watched at this one time. I distinctly remember, but the big show that was there was actually a Wild West show, and they had horse riders and things, guys dressed up full Indian outfits, coming in and doing the thing where they would hop off the horse while it's going and back up on and flip off the horse and back on and things like that. It was pretty amazing acrobatics, and having horses run around in a circle, and they were literally running down the horses up in the air, jumping over the horse heads backwards to the rate the horses were going, and running and jumping and landing on each saddle type thing, and keep going and going, Yeah, weird things that were going on like that, switching horses between each other. And there was a gun show type thing too, where the guy would throw plates up and they put plates and quick shots and all that type of stuff and everything. And then they even did the deal where the guy threw the quarter up in there and he shot it. Later, I found out that's just sleight of hand, and that they already had a quarter with a hole in it, and he would go around holding it up. But even where we were up in the stands, you couldn't even tell if he was holding anything, and everybody would clap, type of thing. But after it was over with, you could go to the thing and you'd see where it had it, and you could tell it was pushed through. It was a bullet that had shot through, but probably not done at that exact moment. It was silver dollar type thing, so it was pretty neat. Anyhow, so this article here is about how people don't have this in the history books. And I remember in our history books there being a picture extremely like this right here that we looked over. So I don't know if they've changed the history books now. Maybe somebody that's been in school since I have, in the 70s and stuff, has actually changed to where they don't show it or talk about it anymore, and where the areas of the Cheyenne and the Crow were, the Shoshone, Apache, and Miami Indians up here. Yeah, oh no, they weren't down here in Miami. That's named for that, but they were way up here. The people know this type of stuff. Illinois is named for those Indians. All these places we have, like Dakotas and so on, is named for them. Things like that. And Seminoles. My dad liked a whole lot of the area that was down through here, which was kind of bordering on the South American concept and the North American Indians, but the Wild West concept. Navajos, Apaches, concepts like that too, and everything, and very much I don't know, Long Ranger and all those type of things. I still have him here now that he's passed, a crap load of books, information, and Louis L'Amour books, if y'all are familiar with that. It's definitely Wild West tales and stuff. They've even made some TV movies out of them. And, a lot of books and time life things and stuff. And that one where it tells you, somewhere in these Chiricahua hills lies the bones of Sitting Bull, last of the great Indian chiefs. No white man will ever know where, da 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 da, and everything. And some of the old VCR tapes, it's narrated by, oh God, what's the guy with the mustache and everything that's, women are going to be mad at me for not being able to spit the guy's name out and stuff, but he's got that real deep country voice when he talks and stuff. And yeah, they just eat that stuff up. My dad liked it a lot too, and anything was, he was in some of the shows and movies, and now he's looked at as being one of the more country people that are left. But let's just go ahead and get into this article real quick. Why isn't this map in the history books? By the age of 10, most children in the United States have been taught all 50 states that make up the country, but centuries ago, the land that is now United States is a very different place. Over 20 million Native Americans dispersed across over 1,000 distinct tribes, bands, and ethnic groups populated the territory. Today, Native Americans count for just 1.5% of the population, and much of their history has been lost, particularly as education system is sadly lacking when it comes to teaching the rich and complex history of the United States. Here we examine little known facts about the Native Americans, which should be included in every history book. And indeed, the smallpox epidemic that had happened after African slavery, where they had never been exposed to it before and they broke out, it caused quite an epidemic, and that seemed to race across. And in reality, it seems before we got west of the Mississippi, a lot of them had died off to a smaller portion, and a lot of the ones west of the Mississippi itself had died off before we ever had a chance to meet people or whatever. And but it's always looked at as being a bad thing too, and it's of course in occurring in with the giant complex of white guilt for having brought humanity and a modern civilization to everybody. And so a lot of people just kind of look over it, as opposed to the concept of like, well, this really is how it happens, so in some ways you have to embrace it, and let's at least understand it and learn about it, for if we mull it over, then we're disrespecting it. And I agree with that concept. As of January 2016, there are 566 legally recognized Native American tribes and subsets in the United States, as determined by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Prior to European contact, there were over 1,000 tribes, bands, or clans, but sadly some were completely extinguished as a result of disease, epidemics, and wars. Today, there's not a single accurate historical map that reflects the location of Native American tribes in North America in a single time period, as the post-European contact situation was ever changing, with contact occurring at different times in different areas. And so the concept they're trying to get at here is that maybe we can't catch an exact moment in time, because when we're talking about all these people being over here, we don't know, because of them warring and them moving quite a bit, if they were moving around when we were over here and didn't know they existed over here and nobody went over there and Lewis and Clark and crap. And so we don't really have that exact snapshot in time, but if we take as we ran into them and make one map out of it, it comes out like this, and like the one that we saw at the very top. And it doesn't actually reflect exactly where they might have been. Some of these people are quite nomadic. There was no border up here at the top where these people went to a line and so on, and all of these lines were made by us. In fact, their lines were extremely blurry, going back and forth, and whenever they had interaction with each other, quite often they had war too. There has to have been as many tribes slowly killed off, separated, changed, and slowly killed off before we ever came to the Americas than there were that we ever met. Native American tribes in the United States are typically divided into 8 distinct regions. Within each tribe had some similarities across culture, language, religion, and customs and practices, and politics. And there were interactions, and we definitely know these people, certain ones of them were friendly tribes with each other and others were not. And there was us and there was them, and then to the other people there was us and there was them, and there was no unity and stuff. I don't know, it's sad to say it, but something like Africa was when we ran into it, and still to this day, where there's a lot of tribalness going on to it, and they don't like the people 20 miles away from themselves, although they are friends with these and these. They don't like those and those, and because I don't like those, you don't like those either, and together, and and stuff, and it'll swell and then break apart and swell and break apart. And you can imagine that that's in a satiated or a constant almost situation, being right on the equator and so with Africa, whereas in the Americas here you would have had a migratory situation going on a lot, certain people not migrating as far as others, and a lot of interaction that had happened between them and elder times that we probably never speak of either, and things. But there's so much to it that and the possibilities. And I think what's neat about it is it kind of shows our own shamanistic caveman young primordial past to a lot of Caucasian type of people, and what it may have been somewhat similar to, although different in its own aspects. Now, northwest coast of America, Native Americans here had no need to farm, as edible plants and animals were plentiful in the land and the sea, so they pretty much didn't have to worry about it, and they didn't migrate too much. Maybe fought up into the mountains more during the summer months and coming back down, but other than that, wouldn't have moved too much. They're known for their totem poles, canoes that could hold up to 50 people, and houses made of cedar planks, which are done a lasting wood, and cedar is of course sacred to a whole lot of people. There's been connections that I've made recently with totem poles, cedar things, houses, and other things, which might lead to a connection that other people aren't even willing to try to make at this point, but I keep edging and poking the cat. California, over 100 Native American tribes once lived there. They fished, hunted small game, and gathered acorns, which were pounded into a mushy meal. And if you've ever ate an acorn, it must have been bitter as hell too. Yet, that shows a sacredness and a love for oak trees and so on. So, I left this out a moment ago going to the map, and I want to put it all in there. So, from the 16th to the 19th century, the population of Native Americans sharply declined from approximately 20 million to a low of 250,000. Today, there are approximately 2.9 million Native Americans in North America. So they're really not that rare. In fact, a lot of the people you might see and think of as possibly having some Mexican descent and so on are actually Native Americans. As of 2000, the largest groups in the United States by population were Navajo, Cherokee, Choctaw, Sioux, Chippewa, Apache, Blackfeet, Iroquois, and the Pueblo. So there's still a lot of them extant here in the Americas, and not necessarily only on Indian reservations and things. So we talked about California acorns and the meal that goes with that. Now, Plateau Area, the Plateau Native Americans lived in the area between the Cascade Mountains and the Rocky Mountains to protect themselves from the cold and weather. Many built homes that were partially underground. We can see that reflected in ideas like if you've ever read Little House on the Prairie, and how the house that they had made before they came out farther was half built into a mound type idea. And I quite often later thought, hey, what if that was a burial mound? I remember even having a dream idea of like ancient Indians and all that type of stuff around about the time that the Stephen King thing came out, that was all about the comics, and it had Chief Woodenhead and the other things. What was a creep show? Yeah, that type of thing. I remember having some conceptive idea about that, going with, of course, being a little kid and having read that and the ancient burial mounds, and then trying to put all three together. And the accident was something like poltergeist whenever you mess with an Indian burial ground concept, or pet cemetery, if you will. Anyhow, the Great Basin stretched across from Nevada, Utah, and Colorado, and the Native Americans of the Great Basin had to endure a hot and dry climate, had to dig for a lot of their food and roots and things. They were one of the last groups to have contact with the Europeans, probably because of that arid area and so on, and just being so far out there. The Southwest Indians, that my dad liked so much, the natives of the Southwest created tier homes made out of adobe bricks. Many of the tribes had skilled farmers, grew crops, and created irrigation canals. Famous tribes here include Navajo Nation, the Apache, and the Puebloan Indians. The Plains area, though, up around Nebraska and the Midwest, if you will, the natives of the Southwest area, the Great Plains Indians were known for hunting bison, buffalo, and antelope, which provided abundant food. They were nomadic people who lived in teepees, and they moved constantly following the herds. And a lot of times people think of American Indians as being, oh, that's them. And it's like, well, no. That's about 6 or 8 of these major groups that are in here, but there's a whole lot more than that. If you break it down, and only certain ones did certain things, there's not a blanket. No pun intended. There's not a monolith of exactly that guy that was on the nickel and that's all of them. Same thing goes with Africa, where you find, just even over in the Ivory Coast, about 8 variations of people. Then we have things like the Khoisan. Then we have people up in the Horn of Africa now, and they'll have their admix and a lot to it. And then there's the Nilotics that are different than that too, and variations on a theme all in between those areas. Also a pygmy population too, so quite a variation on a theme. I don't think we ever found a pygmy Indian, but some of the tribes were quite short compared to others. But Northeastern Indians, though, the Native Americans of the Northeast, lived in an area rich in rivers and forests. Some groups were constantly on the move, while others built permanent homes, generally out of wood and so on, and it's the reason we don't really see much of them at all. Although there are some ancient artifacts they found up there, and it's extremely questionable, where people had built stacked up slate and made a lot of ancient burial places, and you can see all these people going there and telling you, this is from before Indians, and this is stuff that's going on that doesn't correlate to the people that are in the area, because they're nomadic, so what is this? And so much has come out of that, and people want to cover that up due to the dogma that they had built on the idea that there had never been Americans here before Columbus. Then of course we find out more and more and more interaction that had happened before then. Again, I've got 2 videos out that show you ancient Alaskan contact and coming across the Bering Strait. There are other people that have clearly shown the Solutrean contact and coming across from the other way. And then also in this green area, these people that live up here are different than the other people that are there. Genetics might show something to it, but just in the lifestyle, what they have and don't have, and these 50 people carrying boats and things like that, which harkens to perhaps contact with people that had 50 people carrying boats. So, in the southeast, the majority of the Native American tribes were skilled farmers and tended to stay in one place. The largest Native American tribe, the Cherokee, lived there. And so you can see how they would show areas that we even use today as major farming lands as being their major farming lands in some way, shape, or form, too. And, I just got to throw in the Johnny Appleseed thing. Hey, remember that movie? Anyhow, so languages. Now, it's estimated that there were around 1,000 different languages spoken in the Americas before the arrival of the Europeans. This again showing you the dissection of these people. Now, many of these dialects were extremely similar to each other, like you would have in the Middle East and so on, and these people may have been able to talk with each other quite a bit. And then also you find that they must have been quite intelligent. Some of these people that nomadically went back and forth and interacted much have been able to speak 2 or 3 languages to be able to interact back and forth across it. So, there's a lot of thoughts that you might have originally about Indians that may not be able to hold up once you find out more and more about them. Today, there are approximately 296 indigenous languages across North America. 269 of them are grouped into 29 families, while the remaining 28 languages are isolates or unclassified. None of the native languages of North America had a writing system. However, the spoken languages were neither primitive nor simple. Many had grammar systems as complex as those of Russian and Latin. And so it's not a primitive linguistic like you would have found in Africa. And so it shows you a variation on where they were at. And it's probably a burgeoning type thing. They used a lot of symbols. In fact, one of the complex symbols they use that can show you connections to the old world is the swastika, their sun symbol, and a few others that show you definite connections and people carrying on this same concept. There was and is enormous variety between the languages. Individuals from clans or tribes just 100 miles apart may have been completely unable to communicate with each other by speech. The neighboring tribes often used a form of sign language to communicate with each other, and you can see that and adapt it into the sign languages we have today somewhat, helping to speak with the deaf, and how they went up to each other. And some of the ancient stories of some of these tribes, when they held up their hand and said how, is they wanted to make sure you didn't have 6 fingers. Why? Because there was this old story that some people were going to come with these 6 fingers and they were bad men. I'm not going to go into that in this one here, but let's just continue. Oh, they were giants too. According to UNESCO, most of the indigenous languages in North America are critically endangered, and many are already extinct. In the United States, the Navajo language is the most spoken Native American language, with more than 200,000 speakers in the southwestern United States. Only 8 Native American languages in the United States have a population of speakers large enough to populate a medium-sized town. These are Navajo, Cree, Ojibwa, Cherokee, Dakota, Apache, Blackfoot, and Choctaw. And I wish it would really quit resetting on me. Whoops, sorry about that. Less than 20 Native American languages in the United States are projected to survive another 100 years. So if people don't keep up an ancient linguistic, it's going to die off. And here's another picture that you can find in books that'll show you the linguistics running down through and how those are changed. It's the same type of picture we saw at the very start where these, even though they're separate tribes from each other, their linguistics somehow connect. People that are into this have definitely found. And so it's kind of neat to go back and study some of the ancient Americans and the early Amerindians and see what goes on for, I mean, it's the spice of life of everything that went on under the planet. And whenever we look back into things like this, we can definitely see that there were not just the Indians, but there was a whole lot of different people. And the people inhabiting these islands down here and the areas of the southeast seem to have a lot more Caucasianish type features compared to the Indians that you'd find on a nickel or other ones, but darker skin. And that's the reason they, of course, in another way, called them Indians when they had first met. We look at Seminoles and things, and you can see a slight variation on a theme in some of the early art that they drew of these Seminole type people and the connections they tried to make back then that were totally false. But so it's pretty neat. And I just thought I'd do one here on American Indians and some type of connective thing. And like it said in the article, we quite often look over it far too much. But I've had a lot of exposure in my life to it, but I'm pretty sure a lot of other people haven't. And so just thought I'd share a moment. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe. And enjoy. And we'll get on to another tale of old. Peace.